Hey guys, this is Miss Vinson. Today we're going to talk about absolute and comparative advantage. We talked about the production possibilities frontier in our last lesson and how a country has to choose how it's going to use its resources. But in reality, guys, countries don't try to be self-sufficient. In reality, countries specialize in the production of a few things, and then they trade with other countries that have specialized in the production of other things. This is why the United States trades with other countries for things like socks or for things like paper or oil. We don't try to make everything ourselves. We specialize in the production of a few things and we trade those with other countries. Suppose that you have a friend at school and y'all are in multiple classes together during the day. So maybe you have a friend and you're in English class together during the day, and then you're also together in math class. So you may have vocab homework that you have to do, and you may have math homework that you have to do. But if we're talking about strictly being the most productive and efficient with our time, maybe you could specialize in the vocab, maybe they could specialize in the math homework, and then you just trade. Now in reality, you should do your homework. There is value in practicing and doing the work yourself, but it's just an analogy that can help you understand how when people specialize in things and trade instead of trying to do it all themselves, it can be more productive, it can be faster, it can be a more efficient use of time and resources. So how do countries decide what they're going to specialize in? Well, we have to talk about absolute and comparative advantage. First off, let's talk about absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is really easy. It never really trips anybody up. If someone or some country has the absolute advantage in producing something or in doing something, then that means that they are flat out better or faster. Guys, with absolute advantage, that's just basically saying who can do the most with the least amount of resources. Who is flat out better, who is faster. One person can have the absolute advantage in both things. So you may have a situation where one country or one person is actually better at both tasks. You may actually be better than your friend at both English and math, but you can still benefit from specialization in trade just because it helps you get your work done faster. Comparative advantage helps us figure out who should do which job. So absolute advantage tells us who's the best at each job, but comparative advantage tells us who should specialize in each job. And this is all based on that underlying concept that we've been learning for the past couple days called opportunity cost. With comparative advantage, whoever is giving up the least amount of the other task, whoever has the lower opportunity cost when they do a job, should specialize in that job. Now, I know it seems strange. I know the definition may seem a little wordy. So let's work out a couple of examples, and then hopefully through the examples you can see what we're talking about with giving up the least amount. All right, suppose we have two people. We have Zach and we have Abby. And they're trying to figure out who's going to specialize in making radios and who's going to specialize in picking pineapples. Maybe they're stranded on an island or something, I don't know. And they're trying to figure out who's going to make the radios and who's going to get the pineapples. So in an hour, we see that Zach can make 3 radios and Abby can make 2. So just looking at that data right there, who can make more radios in an hour? Of course, Zach can, all right? So we would say that Zach has the absolute advantage in making radios because he can do more with less time. He's flat out better, he's faster. He can make 3, Abby can only make 2. What about collecting pineapples? We see that Zach can collect 12 pineapples in an hour and Abby can only collect 4. So we have a situation where Zach has the absolute advantage in both tasks. Zach's actually better than Abby at both tasks. He's better and faster at making radios. He's better and faster at collecting pineapples. But this doesn't mean that he's going to do all the jobs and Abby's just going to sit there and play in the sand, all right? They have to both be working to be as productive as they can. So even though Zach has the absolute advantage and is better at both things, they still have to figure out who should specialize in each job, how they're going to divvy up those jobs to be as productive as possible. So we got to do comparative advantage for that. Now, what are we comparing with comparative advantage? We're comparing their opportunity cost. So this is how we work it out, guys. And I really want you to practice working it out like this and finding the opportunity cost. In the time it takes Zach to make one radio, and notice how radios are a slower process. In the time it takes Zach to make one radio, look at how many pineapples he could have collected. In the time it takes him to make one radio, he could have collected 4 pineapples for every one radio that he made. Well, let's look at Abby's opportunity cost. In the time it takes her to make a radio, we see that she could only have collected 2 pineapples. And so what we have here is their opportunity cost, what each one of these people are doing, what they're giving up when they make a radio. So let me ask you this question. Who would you rather have making radios? The person who would have to sacrifice 4 pineapples, or the person who's only sacrificing 2 pineapples? It's always better to give up the least amount. Sometimes, guys, I circle that smaller number just to draw my attention to the fact that that's the lower opportunity cost. So in this situation, we would rather have Abby making the radios, because when she makes the radios, she's giving up the least amount of pineapples. Much better to give up 2 pineapples than to give up 4. Now, if Abby has the comparative advantage in radios, if she has the lower opportunity cost when she makes radios, then that means that Zach is automatically going to be specializing in the other tasks. So if Abby's going to specialize and make radios, then we know that Zach is going to specialize in collecting pineapples. And so that tells us where their comparative advantage lies. Nobody will have comparative advantage in both things, all right? Zach might have absolute advantage in both things, but comparative advantage is always telling us who should do which job, and you're never going to have a situation where one person should specialize in all the jobs, all right, while the other people just take a break. So with comparative advantage, you'll never have one person who has comparative advantage in everything. They're either going to specialize in one task or they're going to specialize in another. Now, if Zach and Abby are going to trade, we need to figure out their terms of trade. If Abby's going to specialize in radios and Zach's going to specialize in pineapples, then they need to come to some kind of agreement on what they're going to trade. Notice that Zach's opportunity cost when he makes a radio is 4 pineapples, but Abby's opportunity cost when she makes a radio is 2. If you're looking for terms of trade, guys, beneficial terms of trade for both parties, then you want to make sure that the terms of trade are in between those opportunity costs. So a fair terms of trade for these two would be if Abby traded 1 radio to Zach for 3 pineapples. In that case, Zach would be gaining a radio and he'd only have to give up 3 pineapples, whereas if he did it by himself, he'd have to sacrifice 4 pineapples. And Abby's getting 3 pineapples for every radio that she makes. Normally, she would have had 2 pineapples for every radio that she makes. Now, this example that we did with Zach and Abby and pineapples and radios, this is considered an output type of problem, because if you look at our numbers, it's telling us how much stuff they can produce in a certain amount of time. Some questions you might have will be input types of questions, and those types of questions aren't going to tell you how much stuff is being produced, but they're going to tell you how many resources are going into the production of something. So let's work through one of these examples really quickly, because sometimes input and output examples, they can kind of confuse students. So I want to give you an example of each one. All right, in this example, suppose we have 2 countries. Suppose we have Canada and Italy, and they're trying to figure out who should specialize in making televisions and who should specialize in making computers. Well, let's take a look at their stats. Now, here's the information we have for these 2 countries. We know that it takes Canada 18 hours to make a television. It takes Italy 15 hours to produce a complete television. We also know that it takes Canada 6 hours to complete an entire computer, and it takes Italy only 3 hours to complete an entire computer. So notice how this data is different from what we just did before. Instead of telling us how much stuff they've made, how much output was produced, now our data tells us how much time went into the production of one of these items. So this is an input type of problem. Now, remember, whoever's flat out better, whoever's faster, it means they can do more with less. So let's take a look at this data and figure out who's flat out better at making these things. Who has the absolute advantage? Now take a look at Canada. It takes Canada 18 hours to make a TV, but it only takes Italy 15 hours. So who do y'all think is flat out better? Who do you think is faster? Man, look, Italy, they can make a TV in 15 hours. They are so much faster. They're 3 hours faster than Canada. So we would say that Italy has the absolute advantage in making televisions because they're faster. They can produce it in less time. Let's take a look at computers. All right, it takes Canada 6 hours to produce a whole computer, but it only takes Italy half the time, 3 hours. So here again, Italy is just flat out better and faster at making computers. So Italy actually has the absolute advantage in both televisions and computers. They're just flat out better, they're faster. Now notice in this input type of problem, we're looking for not who makes the most stuff, but who uses the least amount of resources. So here, it's who does it with the least amount of time, who's faster. And that's definitely going to be Italy. So Italy has the absolute advantage in both tasks, but this doesn't mean they're going to produce televisions and computers for themselves. They will still be better off if they specialize in one of these things and trade with Canada. So if we want to know who should specialize in which task, we need to compare their opportunity cost and we need to figure out comparative advantage. So let's do our setup. Remember, anytime you do these, you're trying to figure out in the time it takes them to make one item, how much of the other could they have completed. So let's take a look at Canada for a minute. Notice how TVs is a longer process. It's taken Canada and Italy a lot longer to make a TV than it does to make a computer. So in the 18 hours that it takes Canada to make one TV, in that 18-hour time frame, how many computers could they have made? Well, it takes 6 hours to make one computer. So in an 18-hour time frame, Canada would have been able to make 3 computers. So whenever Canada makes one television, what they're having to give up or sacrifice, what their opportunity cost is, 3 computers. Now, for Italy, it takes Italy 15 hours to make a TV. So that's a longer process too. So in that 15-hour time frame to make a whole TV, we know that Italy is going to be able to make multiple computers too because it only takes 3 hours to make a computer. So if it takes 3 hours for Italy to make a computer, then in that 15-hour time frame, Italy is going to be able to make 5 computers. So we would say that whenever Italy makes a TV, their opportunity cost, what they're having to give up or sacrifice, is 5 computers. Now let's compare these two countries' opportunity cost. Who do you think you would rather have making a TV? The country that would have to sacrifice 3 computers, or the country that would have to sacrifice 5 whole computers ready to go? It's always better to sacrifice or give up the least amount. So here we see that Canada has the lower opportunity cost when they make TVs. We would rather have Canada specialize and make TVs because when they specialize in televisions, they are giving up the least amount of computers. So if Canada's going to specialize in televisions, then that means that Italy is going to specialize in computers. Because remember, even though you can have the absolute advantage in both things, you can never have the comparative advantage in both things. Comparative advantage tells us who should do which job, so it's always going to be split. Now, if these two countries wanted to trade with each other and they wanted to find some mutually beneficial terms of trade, basically, they want to trade in between those opportunity costs. So in this case, Canada would say, hey, Italy, I'll trade you 1 television for 4 computers. Notice how 4 is in between the opportunity cost of 3 and 5. What this means is that to get a television, instead of having to sacrifice 5 computers, Italy would only have to sacrifice 4. They would just have to give away 4 computers. So they're sacrificing less. And for Canada, whenever they trade a television over to Italy, they are, instead of getting 3 computers, they're actually going to get 4. So each one of these countries is able to benefit from specializing and then trading with each other. Comparative and absolute advantage, it is going to be a topic that you're going to see in some free response questions. It is going to be a topic that you're going to have a few multiple choice questions on the AP exams, both micro and macro. So this is a topic you really want to make sure that you feel good about right off the bat. Alrighty guys, hope you understand this. Check you later.